Thank you for joining us today for the March the March edition of the Ohio Workforce Coalition's monthly webinar. We are joined today by Kyle Fee from the Federal Reserve Bank of Cleveland and Laureen Atkins from the Literacy Cooperative. We are going to be hearing about occupational pathways that are informed by individual skills. The Ohio Workforce Coalition offers these webinars to support members and stakeholders from across the state of Ohio. And for those of you who don't know, we have recently released our public policy priorities for the next biennium. Encourage you to take a look at our website to review our policy priorities. Please consider endorsing those. And you can also find recorded versions of previous webinars on the website as well. If you are not signed up for our newsletters, please go ahead and do that. We have recently restarted those as well and are going to be reaching out a lot to our membership as we start having more active engagement with the General Assembly, really working to advance the policy priorities. Certainly, if you have any questions, you can reach out to me directly, or you can put them in the chat today. But with that, I want to just kick us off and get started. Laureen Atkins, like I said, with the Literacy Cooperative, has been part of the Coalition's leadership committee for quite some time now. She's also on the executive work group, so she's helping to really drive the Coalition's work at this point. And with the Literacy Cooperative, she focuses on a lot of special initiatives, strategy, and adult career pathways. And I am going to let her say more about herself and go ahead and kick us off. As I mentioned, we are not going to be using the webcam, so you can turn off your cameras. And I am looking forward to the presentation. So Lori, you are up.
Thank you, Rebecca. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I am excited about today's conversation because I think that is near and dear to my heart. And I'm going to really spend a little bit of time before Kyle talk about adult education as it relates to skill-based pathways and actually adult skills themselves and some data that we have been looking at and wanting to share with you. As Rebecca said, I'm with the Literacy Cooperative. We're located in Cleveland. We basically are an intermediary organization that brings foundations, partners, organizations, and stakeholders together to find practical solutions to improve literacy. We focus on three different groups to advance literacy: early childhood, from birth to kindergarten, of looking at how to start to bring literacy into the home and work with parents to be their child's first teacher. We work with adults, with adult education providers, as well as workforce development, and looking at ways to advance literacy as they attach to career pathway engagement, and then bringing the two together and talking about whole families and how do we address whole family needs together, and bringing early educators and those that work with adults together to partner and be able to offer services kind of in a one-step environment. How do we do all this? We do a lot of convening and informing. There's different strategies, initiatives that I'm a part of. We engage many literacy stakeholders, and literacy is just our literacy stakeholders are many of you out there. It's just anybody that is working with adults, with children, finds that there are obstacles that are related to literacy and numeracy, and so we really try to find ways to address it. Many times it's through championing and awareness of it, promoting promising practices, and then anytime we are identifying strategies, we're measuring the progress of those strategies and always advocating for sustained support for policy as well as funding. I'm going to talk to you today a little bit about some information that has been recently updated, and I'm going to try to bring it into understandable language as much as I can, because it is kind of a lot of statistical information that sometimes gets really hard to swallow and understand and break down into little components. But the information I'm providing today is through the Program for the International Assessment of Adult Competencies, and it's also known as PIAC. So I'll be referring to as PIAC from this point on. In between 2012 and 2017, there was assessments made, and it was what they called the assessment of adult skills. And what it really tried to do was to look at the literacy and numeracy and digital skills of adults internationally. They defined adults as ages 16 to 74. And so they did a series of assessments between 2012 and 2017. The focus was on workplace skills needed for society as well as the global economy. It was an international study. Much of the data that came out between 2012 or really it started in 2014 and 2019 really focused on how we as a nation compared internationally. But last year, they were able to do some small area estimations and were able to bring down some more local data. They were able to do state and county data to really let you know as your community how people are doing as it relates to adult literacy and numeracy skills. This slide deck will be sent out to you via Rebecca, and it will include this URL of how you can get over to the skills map. But if you just Google literacy skills map, it will pretty much come up. This is a great tool because it lets you know based on literacy levels where everybody is in your county, in your state, but it also, you can compare counties, you can compare states, you can look at it as far as how you compare to the nation. There's some American Community Survey data in there. There's a lot of different information in there that really helps you to identify, what is the literacy and numeracy of adults in your community. Giving you a little information before I dig into some of the data to give you a sample of what we found is they divide the literacy and numeracy into 3 categories. And they have an at-risk, a nearing proficiency, and a proficient. And so we've kind of done this red, yellow, green just make it easier. But the ones that are at level 1, this at-risk, they're at or below level 1, individuals in this category are very limited in their English, in their language as well, their literacy as well as their numeracy. They're going to, in many cases, at the lower end of this, be considered functionally illiterate and innumerate. And they understand basic things to do, basic math. They can add, subtract, maybe multiply and divide, but it's got to be very simple operations. They can read and understand short text, and they could probably fill out a basic form online, but they're not able to navigate digitally very well. When you get into the second level, the nearing proficiency, individuals here are at a better advantage. They're able to do most the understanding of literacy and looking at digital text, being able to take multiple pieces of information and kind of compare and contrast and draw conclusions and inferences. Their math is good. They're able to do some harder calculations than those at level 1. But when it gets more complex and when it gets more into abstract and a high level of math problem solving, they're gonna have a little bit of a struggle. And then the proficient ones are at level 3 and above. The individuals here are pretty much able to do all different types of reading, literacy, numeracy, and anything that comes along on a job, as long as they're qualified to do the job. And so that's kind of the 3 levels that the PIAC data divided everyone that did these assessments up, and when they presented the data on the county and the state level, this is kind of how they presented it. So let me give you some examples of how you can compare things and what we did. The Literacy Cooperative is located in Cleveland, and that's in Cuyahoga County. So we compared our county to our neighboring counties in Northeast Ohio. So in doing this comparison, and if you look at the red, yellow, green format, red being the ones that are at risk, meaning they're at a literacy level that is at the lowest level. Yellow meaning nearing proficiency at a middle or level 2, and then the green being proficient at a level 3. what we're seeing in Cuyahoga County as we compare it to our neighboring counties is that we are at the highest level for the ones being at the low end, the at-risk category, at 21% for literacy and 34% for numeracy. So we also have the highest population as compared to all of these areas. So there's about, if you look at the literacy level and you look at 21,000, you're talking probably about 190,000 people that are at that low end. Taking it a little bit farther and looking at urban counties throughout our state and our neighboring states, what we find in comparing that, another way you can compare it using that map is we find that we don't fare the worst, but we're still high up there with the number of individuals that are at that low end. Wayne, Michigan beats us in that category, which really isn't saying much, but that Wayne, Michigan is where Detroit is located. So comparing it that way, we still see that we do have the higher level of individuals at that at-risk level. But the good news in all of this and looking at most of this data is that we have a higher, we have a pretty good percentage of people that are at the proficient. So, and even the nearing proficiency, the level 2, means that we're still in good shape for most individuals and looking at their literacy and numeracy and how it relates to most jobs that are going on. So that, that data is, that is saying still a lot for most communities. When you think of this data though, and you look at the levels and the low levels, you many times you think about, oh, okay, so that must be the people that are unemployed or are on public assistance that are at that very low end of the literacy level. And that is not the case. It's not that black and white. What we see is that, in all the levels, the majority of the individuals are employed, and, 62% at the very, very low end and 79% at the very, very high end. So individuals are employed and they're able to make do with their literacy levels and their numeracy levels in the job that they have. And for the most part, they do it well, or they wouldn't be continuing in that job. If you look at it further, 46% of US working adults scored no higher than a level 2 in literacy. So almost half are not proficient. They're at some level of proficiency or lack of proficiency in their jobs. And at the very, very low end, 15% scored at the 2 lowest ends. And what they did in this chart here is they took the very low end and they divided it to the very low group that was below a level 1 and then a level 1. It says 14% and it says 15% above. You'd think that that's a math thing, but it's a rounding error. They do note that. And at the high end, the level 3 and the level 4, 5, where they broke that down a little bit much more so you could see what that looks like. So what we're saying here is there's individuals working that are doing very well at their job that are still experiencing low literacy and numeracy scores. Why is that? What does that mean? Why would that be important? Well, since 1970, the U.S. economy has shifted from more routine and manual tasks towards analytical and interpersonal tasks that require higher skills. So basically, some people might have been in a job 10, 15 years doing the same job. And what they found is it's become harder for them. And it's become harder and harder as they went and they go through and they do their job. And what they find from that is they've learned to adapt. So even if they have a low literacy level and it's harder for them to adapt, they've been adapting to it and they've been able to go through, but it's been kind of changing over time and it might be getting a little bit harder for them. What's interesting about this though is when there's dramatic change in a very short amount of time, the individuals at a lower literacy level are going to struggle a little bit more. And some of that came through last year with the pandemic. And if you think about it, there were some, that it was through no fault of their own. They found themselves unemployed because of whatever the health order was, or, their business decisions or whatever the case was. But there was many people that had a job that they had to be flexible to change it, whether it was transferring from in-person to digital, learning, a virtual platform, being able to think about what was the work that they did and how they can translate it differently so they can keep working. And when it was such a short amount of time to be able to transition over, some people did struggle. And, not that this next slide that I'm going to show you isn't the only reason because somebody was low literate that this happened to them, but you have to think about that there is that chance. And what we look at is the percent increase in unemployment between December of 2019 and December of 2020 as a result of the pandemic. And when you look at this number alone, the percentage that went up, if you look at the area, the two counties that were at the two highest ends for being at the at-risk population, they had the most significant increase in unemployment. Now, again, you always will count that companies closed, they had to reduce staff, they had to do that, but some of it comes into play that when people aren't able to be adaptive or flexible enough, this will happen because there's not much they can do with that. And so they will lose their job because they can't adapt quickly enough. So we have to always keep that in mind, is that when people are working, they learn to do their job very well, but they might still have struggles in literacy and numeracy when they're asked to advance or change their job within a time without having some things in place to really help them through that. When you dig a little bit deeper into the individuals that are employed through this PAC data, and you think of what jobs they held, PAC used the International Standard Classification of Occupations that really put things down into 4 categories. Skilled occupations, which are managers, professionals, technicians, and associate professionals, semi-skilled white collar, semi-skilled blue collar, and then your elementary occupations, which are you would think your ground floor positions at most organizations. And so they divide them in those ways. So in your head, you think, okay, so what I'm going to see next is that, with the elementary occupations, those are the ones at the lower level, and at the skilled occupations, I'm going to see them at the higher level. But then when you see it, you'll notice that individuals at every occupational level represent every single literacy level. So you see this, 27% of skilled professionals are at level 1 or below, and so on. Now what is, understanding is that they're also in level 3, 66% of that score is skilled. So that's, that would be, you would want that, and you would know that would happen, but there's still that percentage of people that are at a lower level in a higher position. When you ask the workers how they feel about it, so you saw all the different levels that they're at and how they're feeling about it, what we find out is that most people are good with what they can do. And in their job, they do it well. They feel they do it well. They feel they can cope with more demanding duties than the job is required for the most part. Also, when you ask them, and this is by, we're looking at it by literacy level now, do you need further training? For the most case, people are fine. They feel they can do their job without any additional training. When you take it and look at it by their occupational level, the same thing applies, whether they're in an elementary occupation or a skilled occupation. The majority feel they can do more demanding duties that the job requires right now with limited training. So people get a good feeling for what they're doing. They feel that they can do that. They're going to hide if they have a literacy and numeracy issue because they don't want people to know that. Where it comes out is when they're trying to advance into positions, or they're trying, or they get laid off and they have to go into other positions. And we really need to look and think about it at all times, is that literacy and numeracy really needs to be part of occupational skills training. And, if you look at it as a skill-based approach, looking at things on a skill level, then, we have a better opportunity to make more adults successful. And one example of that skill-based approach was something that was a pilot that was led by Towards Employment a few years back, called Talent NEO. And what we did is we were, I was part of it, and we were connecting job seekers and employers through skills. And we used WorkKeys as the assessment tool. And what was significant about WorkKeys is it looked at the skill score of an individual in a variety of different categories and compared their skill score to those that were doing to the different occupations that they wanted to go into. So if they wanted to be a welder, they would test in WorkKeys, and then their results would be compared to what does a welder need in a skill score. And then if there were any deficiencies there and what they needed besides the occupational training, they also know what they needed to brush up on with literacy and numeracy. What we found through this is that many people might not have had the education that was required for the job, but because of their prior experience and their knowledge, they had the skill to do the job. And so, it wasn't just about the education. It wasn't just about the literacy level. It was combining all of those together. And that's what we really need to think about when we are talking about these different opportunities for advancement. So how do literacy levels play a part in the development of skills for in-demand jobs, and how can we prepare adults for in-demand jobs using this data? There's some great opportunities out there, and Kyle's going to talk about one of them. So I'll put a little plug in for him as one of I think of the opportunities. First of all, in anything that we're doing, we should be looking at how we can contextualize literacy numeracy with skills training. And contextualizing it is taking math and reading and putting the lessons as they equate to the job that people are training for. And it's learning how to do measurements using the metric system when you're trying to go into healthcare. It's learning how to use a ruler to do manufacturing and construction, and actually doing exercises that are related to the ruler and what types of measurements they would be doing. So it's putting all of that together. The Literacy Cooperative has done a lot of work with our adult educators, and has that actual contextualized curriculum available on their website, and it is free of charge. It's also connecting adult literacy professionals with workforce and economic development professionals. They need to be in the room together and really planning out how they can advance workers. And it's not just, oh, okay, we're going to send them over to adult education to get to brush up on their math skills. It's actually trying to see how they can combine through this contextual process, combine that training together so that people don't have to walk away from what they wanted. They can get it all combined together. What you're going to learn from Kyle on this Occupational Mobility Explorer, this is a great tool that I think is going to help identify opportunities, because it looks at the skills of jobs, and it's based on what employers are saying is needed in the jobs, and looking at how we can compare somebody's skill level to that. Internal and external pathways are another thing. We have so many people that lost their job in one industry that need to, and there's a surplus going on in another industry. How do we look at occupations that are not in the same sector and see who are the prime candidates that could jump over to that type of opportunity, as well as advance individuals that are currently at their employer? And then also making sure that our sector partnerships are thinking about a skill-based approach as they're working with individuals and employers on this. So I know I threw a lot at you during this time, and I think there'll be a chance for questions and answers later, but just wanted to kind of put that out there for you about just the literacy and numeracy and how important it is with skills. And then, as you're hearing about what Kyle's going to say, I think it will complement nicely in what he's going to say. So I'm going to stop talking now, and I'm going to turn it over to Kyle with the Federal Reserve of Cleveland. Stop sharing.
Thank you, Lori. And let me get my stuff up. Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks again for the opportunity. I really appreciate the invite back. They say when you get invited back to do stuff, you've done it well. So hopefully we can share some more information with you and do well. I'm also a former Ohio Workforce Coalition member. So I am always impressed and appreciative and very thankful of the work that the Ohio Workforce Coalition does on behalf of job seekers across the state of Ohio. I am a senior policy analyst at the Federal Reserve Bank of Cleveland. In my role, I essentially do applied research in the workforce development and economic development space. And this is kind of a great example of that. I also see my role as a one to instigate or kind of push new ideas and try and hopefully make folks a little bit uncomfortable sometimes and get them to think about new stuff. So I think this work does a lot of that here. And with that said, I will give the usual Fed disclaimer that these are my views and do not necessarily represent the views of the Federal Reserve Banks of Cleveland or Philadelphia or the system. This work was done in conjunction with my colleagues, Keith Wardrop and Kyle DeMaria at the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia. Now this work is kind of stemming from our previous work on opportunity occupations, which some of you guys may be familiar with. For those of you that are not, opportunity occupations are those that are available to someone without a four-year degree, but still pay above the median wage adjusted for living conditions. So generally in that kind of good jobs discussion, very similar types of subsets of occupations that we're talking about. But we quickly realized that it's does no good if you just identify occupations. We need to be able to get people into those occupations. So we really thought about this initial round of skills-based work also in a different kind of world. It was pre-COVID. It was in a tighter labor market, so businesses were also very concerned about not being able to find talent or people to fill positions. People were getting kind of stuck in lower wage work and not having opportunities to move up. So again, this was kind of conceived at that time, but I think it's actually more relevant than ever. And I'm going to show you some projections, some differential impacts in the labor market from the COVID pandemic, as well as some latest Bureau of Labor Statistics employment projections to kind of scare you a little bit and hopefully get you thinking that we need to kind of do stuff differently and think a little bit differently in this space. And then skills approach could be one way to do that. So I'll do a quick review of the skills stuff as well as the benefits, and then we'll jump into the demonstration of the tool and some discussion points. So this is payroll employment for Ohio and the nation. Ohio is the red line, the nation is the blue line. So Ohio is generally on par as far as declines from the pandemic from last year, declining roughly 15% in April. And then currently we're about 6.5% down, or 307,000 jobs. I'll say that again. 307,000 jobs. The state of Ohio is down from January of last year. For some context, that's roughly a third of the employment in one of the large metros, being Cleveland, Cincinnati, or Columbus. So imagine losing a third of employment in one of those places. This slide takes some of that same information and kind of presents it a little bit differently according to sector. The gray bar is the share of employment within each sector, and the blue bar is the share of employment loss from January to January of last year. And then the orange bar is the share of employment in each sector for people of color. So in the leisure and hospitality industry, for example, that accounts for 10% of the state of Ohio's employment. It accounted for over 30% of the employment loss over the past year, and about 8% of the people of color actually work in the leisure and hospitality industry. So from this chart, a couple things that really jump out. One is that some of our larger industries were the main sources of employment loss. Those are going to be those 5 at the top of leisure, hospitality, government, manufacturing, health services, as well as professional and business services. Now, these 5 industries also account for a significant amount of the decline in employment for people of color, 55% compared to 48% for white employment. But again, I think that a quick kind of takeaway from this is that the pandemic is hitting those people of color harder than it has for the white population or white workers. And we can see that in this chart too. This chart is from a recent release by myself under the Program of Economic Inclusion coming out of the Federal Reserve Bank of Cleveland. This data is up on our website for 35 states as well as the nation. And what it does is it kind of uses survey data to kind of give us an early peek at what we think some of the publicly published data will look like. So on this chart here, we have the black-white employment rate gap. So the white employment rate in Ohio minus the black employment rate in Ohio, and that's the solid red line on here. And then we have because this is survey data, we have the 95% confidence interval, just to stress that point, that again, it's survey data. This is kind of our best guess, but there is some error on here. Now, a few things stand out on this slide. One is that the kind of large jump in the employment rate gap in 2020 in Ohio, it's currently 12.5 percentage points. So that means the white employment rate is, let's say it's, for ease of numbers, it's 62%, and the black employment rate is 50%. That's not the exact number, but that's the interpretation. And again, larger disparities in this, or larger gaps, mean there's more disparity, and economic inclusion is struggling. I also want to note, this is not a really big part, but I think it's an important note as far as economic inclusion goes, that there's some cyclical nature to these gaps, at least the employment rate gap, where it generally tends to increase during recessions and decline during expansion. So for those of you out there that are interested in economic inclusion, one quick rule of thumb would be to avoid recessions and prolong expansions. But either way, disproportionate impact on Black workers. This is a similar chart, but this time, instead of looking at employment rates, we look at median hourly earnings for workers in Ohio. And despite some movement in and around the employment rate gap, we've actually seen kind of a steady progress on the Black-white earnings gap over the last 20 years. So we started out at about $3.22 in 2000, and it's currently $4.37 in 2020. So despite any progress that we've made on getting workers of color into or employed, there's still some obstacles and barriers preventing them from getting employed into faster growing, higher wage occupations. So some issues with occupational segregation, as well as underrepresentation amongst Black workers. So now this slide, again, is going to kind of continue to build and make the case a little bit about why you guys should be concerned about this. So the top 4 rows are different population segments within Ohio and their corresponding educational composition in 2019. And then across the bottom bar there is the BLS projected growth by entry-level education. And this is basically a breakdown of where growth is going to happen. And to kind of read it is that saying that 39% of growth over the next 10 years is likely going to be in occupations that have an entry-level education of requiring a bachelor's degree. And then 11% for a graduate professional degree. And then conversely, on the flip side, there's about 37% of projected job growth is going to actually be a high school diploma or less. So we're continuing to see that kind of polarization of the labor market, where we have the very high end, high wage workers, and then we have on the other end we've got low wage workers. And you can see by the demographic profiles that who's gonna win and who's gonna lose in some of these trends. And not surprisingly, it's kind of Black and Hispanic populations that are really going to be kind of losing out on this on future growth going forward. So just a quick recap of things to scare you guys. Jobs are still down a significant number. Declines in employment disproportionately hit people of color. Wage gaps continue to widen, and future prospects generally look pretty grim. So to me, these are very strong points of, we need to think differently. We need to try new things. Let's try and continue to innovate and move forward from there. So we kind of came up with this idea of a skills-based approach. And what we do is essentially think about an occupation as a bundle, think about an occupation as a group of tasks that someone has to complete. similar to what Lori was talking about previously. And, to complete those tasks, they have skills. So we really wanted to think about how can we take advantage of the skill data that we have in the Burning Glass online jobs data to be able to think about how do these overlap and how can we take advantage of some of these overlapping skills and use skills to kind of promote job transition and occupational mobility more generally. So one way to thinking about this, it is again a kind of an example of how we approach this. This is in the Dallas-Fort Worth metro area, and we've got fitness trainers and paralegals. So two occupations which are very not alike, and you can see that by the skill similarity score of 0.26. As well as the bar chart. There's a lot of orange bars signaling a kind of skill deficit. But what we want to try and think about and focus on is what about those occupations that do have significant overlaps with skills? And this example illustrates that for a retail salesperson with a sales rep in a service sales rep, excuse me, in the Phoenix Metro. So very few orange bars, and that kind of translates to a high skill similarity score of 0.86 between these two occupations. So with that kind of concept, we crunched some numbers. We really were concerned with primarily lower wage workers and opportunity occupations. We also wanted to make sure that any transitions that we were highlighting actually included some pay increase. So there's a kind of a 10% pay increase baked into our research. And then we also wanted to make sure that occupations were projected to remain stable or kind of grow nationally for that. And let's see, do I need to? No. So just some quick highlights from this work. I think this one always sticks out as a very important feature is just that 21st century or soft skills or foundational skills, whatever you want to have them. There's a significant amount of overlap between those types of skills in lower wage occupations as well as opportunity occupations. So again, kind of confirming this idea that we can use these skill adjacencies to allow someone to kind of transition to a new occupation. And we also found that more than half of lower wage employment can be paired with at least one transition. So again, we recognize that there are still some kind of dead end jobs that are lower wage works, but at least there's a potential for significant upward mobility in roughly half of lower wage work. And then when we kind of look at this in total and kind of get down to the nuts and bolts of it and actually what matters, we found that focusing on skill-based transitions can lead to significant pay increases from one lower wage occupation to another lower wage occupation. It's kind of been found to increase average annual wages by almost $7,000. And that kind of increases as we work our way up from lower wage occupations to opportunity occupations, but also from opportunity occupations to opportunity occupations. Okay, so now we get to the tool. I'm going to stop sharing for a minute and share a different screen. But I will say that after we released this report in the summer of last year, we realized that we're kind of leaving a lot of good data that people can use kind of on the sidelines. So we kind of brainstormed and really thought that there's got to be a way that we can get this information out there in a kind of usable, interactive way. And we worked with some tech folks at the Philadelphia Fed, and we created this Occupational Mobility Explorer. Again, it was released in December, so it's only been live for about 10 weeks now. And we've been having lots of different kind of conversations around different use cases for this tool, from both the job seeker's perspective to more of a strategic, higher level planning perspective, all the way to trying to think about how a specific employer can think about recruiting from really hard to fill occupations. But I think, most importantly, it's just additional information for folks to have out there, especially in the labor market. That's not something that everyone appreciates, but more information, the better for that. Um, and I would love to have any conversation with folks later on this call or in the future about potential use cases or different ideas that you're looking to kind of incorporate our tool into. We've heard quite a few ideas, and they're all very interesting, and I would love to have some more. So now I'm going to walk through some of the tool here and show you a couple examples, point out hopefully all the bells and whistles to it. There's essentially three parts to this tool. There's the build your own path. That's relatively self-explanatory. I'll show you in a minute. The compare skills, and then the view top transitions. The view top transitions tab is generally just a data download. So I'm going to skip that for today's talk, but just so you know that it's there. So let's get started here. I'm gonna pick, let's see, Cleveland, and just to show you that this actually kind of makes sense, I'm gonna do something in kind of this food prep world, fast food world that again produces kind of the outcome you would expect it to produce. But just to show you guys an example of how it works. So you can start out as a food prep worker. We've got a lot of data built into the tool in addition to the skill similarity score. You have stuff on the number of jobs, the annual median wage, what a wage increase would be, its projected growth rate, and then again, the skill similarity score of 0.81 for the food prep workers. In each kind of iteration, it'll give you up to 10 options to choose to add to different occupations to the path. So you could always think about transitioning from a cleaner and of vehicles and equipment from that. So the options are kind of limitless within reason, and they kind of allow a lot of interactive features for that. So I'm just going to add this. And then, cooks come up again, not surprising. Add that, and then, but I think a key part of this is let's think about comparing skills. I'm going to zoom in a little bit here. And when you hit on that compare skills tab, that really allows you to see what employers are asking for. Projected on this table is the share of online job ads in this metro asking for these specific skills for these specific occupations. So, anything in orange refers to the food prep worker, and anything in the blue refers to this combined food prep and service worker. And the way to think about it is, obviously there's a lot of skill overlap that can facilitate that transition. But if you scroll down, you'll begin to see there's skills that don't have, kind of both bars to them. So in this case, the blue bar refers to the previous occupation. So there are some skills that might not be utilized in the kind of the new occupation that they're trying to go to, but they still could be important nonetheless. And then, if we're thinking about what skills does someone really need to develop to make this transition, they can think about looking at these orange bars and focus them on some of these skill development things. Okay, so that's one example. I'm going to start a new path, and we'll go to Cincinnati this time. And as I mentioned previously, COVID is a big issue. So let's think about cashiers, because cashiers are going away. I feel like every time I walk in a grocery store, there's the kind of scan your own stuff. So let's think about cashiers. Excuse me. One option for cashiers would be to kind of continue in somewhat of a customer service role, but a customer service rep varies regardless of what occupation you're into. So kind of we'll add that to the path. And then, let's say we really like kind of dealing with customers, over the phone. We've been working for this organization that's all about helping people through housing issues related to lending or financing. And this person really got a kind of a passion to be a credit counselor. So there's actually a very high similarity score. The downside of kind of a move to a credit counselor is that there's not a whole lot available, but there is significant pay increase and there is significant growth projected. So we're going to add that to it. And then, we'll start back up to the top and think about how this can continue to progress. But, loan officers, bam. So kind of, again, transitioning from something that might be hard hit to something that's not. And there's also another example that's around, transitioning from similar skills out of a meeting and convention planner, because we're not having those these days. So how can we transition out of them? But in interest of time, I'm going to go to the compare your skills tab. And this is the example that I like to use from an employer perspective. So someone that's looking for a hard to fill occupation, and let's say it's in Austin, and it's computer network support specialists. And we also know that bartenders are in large supply and large demand in Austin. So how can we think about taking an occupation that's been harder hit or has a large supply and transition them into in-demand occupations like a computer network support specialist? And again, here the same kind of concept and logic applies, that we're going to want to try and train that bartender up on some of these skills of technical support, Cisco, Linux, troubleshooting, those types of things that would help facilitate that transition. All right, I'm going to stop, share that, and go back to my presentation. And slideshow. I like to kind of end my talk or use my talk showing this bridge. It's the Detroit Superior Bridge in Cleveland, Ohio. At its time of completion, it was the largest steel and concrete reinforced bridge in the world. So really innovative, cool stuff. But I also think it serves as a great analogy for the journey that someone has to go on to be on to get a job. So that you have the job seeker on one side of the river, and we have the employer on the other side of the river. But importantly, kind of along the way, is a lot of those supportive services that are so important. And if kind of we go to this skills-based world, there's also going to be a need to take assessments and assess competencies and skills. So that's a kind of a big piece that needs to also be completed, that helps kind of complete this journey. But the idea is also that, to meet in the middle, there's got to be significant coordination and collaboration and kind of buy-in from employers too, because in a lot of conversations that we've had, everyone's really interested in this kind of idea. But if employers aren't really at the table, it kind of makes for a challenging discussion, and you can do a lot of work, but not have the demand for this stuff. So I'll end with a couple points here. Is I think skills need to be emphasized for any chance at having an inclusive recovery going forward. Skills-based approaches hold promise for job seekers and employers, but again, require a lot of investment and buy-in to be successful. And then I think skills-based approaches largely align with the Ohio Workforce Coalition policy priorities. Flexible training fund to me is a no-brainer. The employer premier employer designation, I think is really exciting idea, and maybe they could get extra points if they think about using kind of a skills-based approach to some of their hiring and internal promotion and whatnot. And then ultimately, sector partnerships to me are kind of a no-brainer place to start some piloting of these approaches, and could really be a useful learning ground for how to implement these skill-based approaches successfully. So with that, I will stop sharing, and I look forward to the discussion and conversation.
Thank you, Kyle. Well, we've certainly received a lot of positive feedback in the chat. I think your calendar might start filling up with all sorts of invitations to speak to different groups. But I want to kick off the questions. Just you mentioned just talking a bit more about where you see this going. You mentioned when we were talking before we started here today that you've gotten lots of interest, and I'm wondering if you could say more about where you're getting the most interest, what you're most excited about as far as some next steps.
Yeah, so we've been getting a lot of interest from obviously the workforce development space, whether that's training providers, community colleges. We've been WIBs. We've had some real good conversations with some Department of Labor, some state Department of Labor on the East Coast that I'm really excited about. Potentially piloting some of this work again to hopefully share what we learn with everybody. I think there's also a couple like for-profit interesting conversations I've had. Some are very much in the tech space that are trying to swoop in and bring tech solutions to every problem. But those I'm less excited about. But I would love to have more conversations with employers to really think about the ROI involved, right? Because that's really the thing we've got to be able to show employers is that the ROI for you guys is speaks for itself and kind of makes the case. So if there's more opportunities for that, I look forward to them, and actually all opportunities, I should say that.
Great. Well, I think the employer point is really interesting because in conversations I've had with some large employers, helping individuals navigate once they're employed, navigate the skills pathway once they're employed is really challenging, depending on how the LMS is set up or how they're actually tracking skills. So I think there's certainly a lot of potential there. So I guess my next question is in recognition of Women's History Month. You talked about the possibility to have skills-based approaches work, particularly for people of color. And I'm wondering if you've looked at any gender dynamics.
We haven't, although I will say that the pandemic has hit people of color and then women especially hard as well. So there's definitely more opportunities for them to think about using the tool. And I'll also say that in terms of women, and this goes back to our report we released last summer, some of the occupations that we found to be kind of dead-end occupations or occupations that didn't have a whole lot of transitions associated with them tended to be, primarily employ women. So home health aides is one that, it was a very little skill overlap within the kind of healthcare field, but surprisingly, and that kind of limits where someone can go with it from that occupation.
Gotcha. I'm going to post a link to the Opportunity Occupations report in the chat. So those of you who have not seen it can refer back. I don't think we have any more questions in the chat. I guess, Kyle, you posted a question about Talent Neo that Lori replied to. And I would encourage those of you who are not familiar with that work to take a look because that takes some of what both Kyle and Lori talked about into a very practical place with people and having real individuals who've gone through skill assessments and tried to secure employment. So let's see, it looks like Mike Glavin has a question. Got a hand up?
Yep. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yep.
Cool. So Kyle, this is great. I have a question actually, kind of building off of your recommendation for a sector partnership kind of overlap. So we're working in the IT sector partnership here in Northeast Ohio at GCP. And so I'm curious, like, is there a way to kind of work backwards from the destination employers to identify maybe some of those high potential origin employers or origin occupations where, you know, maybe folks in the IT industry can start, you know, targeting, you know, looking at the list right now, you know, bus and truck mechanics or, you know, community health workers, or is there a way to kind of, I guess, go the other direction to, you know, for us on kind of the employer side, reaching back into the workforce, identifying where the high potential crossover is for specific industries, you know, in this case, particularly IT.
Yeah, so the compare skills tab allows you to do a little bit of that, Mike, but it doesn't include some of the similarity scores behind it. But I'd be happy to have another conversation and kind of run through some of the other data, or at least some of the other data pieces that I think you would need to kind of help that conversation.
Awesome. Yeah, that'd be fantastic. So I'll shoot you an email about that. I downloaded the whole data set and fiddling around with pivot tables right now, but I don't think I'm doing it right. So yeah, I'll shoot you an email and we figure it out together. Appreciate it.
Cool.
Yeah, and keep us posted, Mike. It would be great to see, again, more examples of how this is made in practical application. You know, from my perspective, it's where the rubber meets the road. So it's great to hear those ideas. We have time, I think, for just another question or so. I know we've got some folks on here who are work in Ohio's work-ready communities. We've got some workforce board or workforce OMJ staff. Any questions? Any other questions come up?
I would also say if you're shy and you don't want to give away your intel, feel free to contact me directly. I'd be happy to work with you guys.
Well, thanks, Kyle. I've not seen anything pop up. I want to thank you. And well, actually, if there's questions for Lori too, feel free to enter those. I know, as you probably saw in my mistaken chat to everyone instead of Lori, that she had to move really, really quickly. So please do reach out if you've got questions for her and or enter them now. And they both Kyle and Lori added their emails to the chat. You can reach out to them. You can reach out to me. And of course, you can share this recording with your colleagues on once it's posted on the website, you'll be added to the group. So I think that wraps us up. Thank you all for joining. I hope you'll visit the website, take a look at our priorities, and endorse the policy recommendations. And we'll see you back here next month. We'll be hearing from the Ohio Welcoming Centers, who will be talking about the needs of Ohio's immigrant and refugee job seekers. So thanks again, and everyone have a great rest of the week and weekend.